Okay, who's ready for chapter 13? We are in chapter 13. It is called Dirk Jan's Mission. And here we go. Here's the situation, said Uncle Cor, taking Dirk Jan aside. I'm the head of the KP department, which supplies the other underground groups with weapons. There was to be a weapon drop near Leiden next week, but it can't go through now because of today's raid. All those fields will be watched. I've decided the fields around here are very suitable. We can use the Giant as a temporary storage place, and they can be transported further by boat. Do you guys remember where the British airman was hiding? Where Charles was hiding in the Giant, like in the other windmill that's a ways from the Winged Watchmen, where they live. Okay, so they're going to hide the stuff in the windmill. Now, I want you to get a message to my friend Gerardus van Manen with a message which you are to learn by heart. It will seem nonsense to you because it is in code. The less you know, the better for all of us. If Van Manen says the new plan is feasible, you'll have to let me know as soon as possible by mill telegraph. Do you guys remember that, where you move the mill, like the windmill, depending on what direction it is, it would send messages. Like if it was this direction, it's positive. If it's this, it's negative. And if it's this, it's a birth. If you would know things. So that's how they're going to communicate. I must make arrangements here. Couldn't you just write a letter? Asked Dirk Jan, frightened at the idea of garbling the message. No, we don't use letters in the underground. If we can possibly avoid it, they're too dangerous. I had to eat some once to keep them out of the wrong hands. Eat them? Dirk Jan looked horrified. Uncle Cor laughed. I did feel a bit like a goat, he confessed. When Van Manen has given the okay, we'll get you to the cornmill, the Falcon. Miller Van Ryn will receive you kindly, but it is his assistant, Van Loo, who will help you. Give him our password, Old Rhine and Green Cabbage, and tell him that your uncle of the garage had a sad or happy event in the family, as the case may be, and wants you to have the mill put into joy or sorrow. Joy will tell me it was a yes. Sorrow will tell me it was a no. Tell Van Loo to wind the mill toward Hoogmerpolder. The Hoogmerpolder mill will then give the sign to Jan Caterveen, which we can see from here. So the windmills are spaced, kind of like, you guys remember the stories about like the Indian smoke signals? That's exactly what the mills were like. They would use them the same way. Like this mill would talk to this mill, would talk to this mill. So the signals would go for miles and miles and miles. So that's how they would communicate. Now, you must remember that it takes time to wind a mill. After sundown, it's too dark to see. So you should be at the Falcon at 3:30. You can't be out after curfew, so you'd better stay the night in Leiden. The Van Manens will put you up. He showed Dirk Jan the various addresses on his map, for it was not wise to ask the way and reveal oneself as a stranger. Then he made Dirk Jan repeat all he had been told. And when he had it well in his mind, Uncle Cor gave him a message which was in rhyme so that he would more easily remember it. Laden nests are preyed upon, spread it to the horizon. Eggs are safe, in Norderar, same time, signal it afar. Number 1 and number 2, number 16, see it through. Mother got Dirk Jan some extra warm clothing and baked good bread for him out of her last wheat. She filled his satchel with some potatoes and added 2 plucked chickens, some smoked eels, and a jar of milk. You'll need presents for the Van Manens and Miller Van Ryn, she said. Father gave Dirk Jan the heavy silver watch he always carried, and then it was time for bed. Joris and Raina were already fast asleep. Joris in the attic and Raina with Mother in the living room press bed. Father and Uncle Cor would sleep with the boys upstairs. Dirk Jan was too excited and nervous about the message to sleep right away. And then he dreamed that big birds were after him, dropping eggs on his head, and that he had to swallow a letter the size of a pillow, the stamp stuck in his throat. Finally, he woke up, choking. When Father called him, it was still pitch dark. Mother had hot rye porridge waiting for him, and she handed him his neatly packed satchel. It felt very heavy. She brought him to the door and stood shivering in the cold wind. God be with you, my son, she said, and she hugged him. She watched him until he was out of sight. At first, Dirk Jan had the cold, dark world all to himself. A powdery snow covered the fields, and his footsteps sounded shrill in the silence. He walked straight in spite of the weight of the satchel and breathed deeply. This is what he wanted to do for so long, to do something. He was making good progress. Already light was dawning at the horizon. He slapped his arm across his chest to warm them. He was glad of his gloves. He wondered how this weapon dropping was organized. People in London were in touch with the underground, of course. How would they hide such a big affair from the Schneiderhans? Dirk Jan would have to warn Uncle Cor about that. Perhaps Uncle Cor would let him help. The stars were fading and a milky light oozed over the landscape. Mists rose from the fields to meet it, and for a while Dirk Jan walked in a kind of veil. This was rent and scattered by the first rays of the sun, which burst across the horizon in all the glare and pomp of royalty, a royalty that even the Nazis could not banish. Its light spilled over and flooded the shivering landscape with gold, echoing in glittering windows or gleaming patches of ice. Now people came creeping out of hiding places, out of barns and haylofts, or the homes of kind farmers where they had found a night's shelter. These were foragers, inhabitants of hungry cities where food could not be even These were the foragers, inhabitants of hungry cities where food could not be had even in inadequate ration coupons, where light and fuel had been cut off and people had to live on watery soup distributed from central kitchens. The most able-bodied members of the families, mostly females on account of the manhunt, ventured forth in the cold to find something to eat. It was because of these heroic activities that many Dutch people managed to survive. Dirk Jan had heard about these trips, but he had never witnessed any. The sight shocked him deeply. He seemed to be in the company of an army of tattered beggars who had offered their good clothes for barter. A few lucky ones had rusty bikes without tires. Few had decent shoes. Many had shoes that did not match, or clogs that were split and nailed together. Again, some were walking on little planks tied under their feet with rags. There were women pushing carts in which their children sat wrapped in blankets beside dearly bought sacks of carrots and potatoes. One woman pushed a pram on 3 wheels which constantly threatened to tip over. An old man with a white beard slipped and fell. If Dirk Jan had not helped him, he would not have had the strength to get back up again. There was this strange apathy about these people. And I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see the picture on the, here we go. Can you guys see that? Oh, never mind. I was going to try to click and make the picture bigger for you. No, it's wanting to take the word about. So there, if you can see, there is the cart and someone with a bag, and you can see the windmill in the distance. So I can do this. This might make it bigger for you. Now, can you see that? You can see the windmill, the sparse, and here's Dirk Jan with his bag on his back, so that he can carry everything that his mother sent with him. Okay. Hold on, guys. It just is trying to not let me out of it. There we go. Okay. So all of their energy, so remember it said that there was a strange apathy about the people. All of their energy was concentrated on getting home. They looked neither to the right nor to the left, but they walked like puppets. Hunger and love for those at home drove them on. This was only the beginning of the winter. There was not yet a continuous procession of foragers from dawn to dusk, in such close formation that it was like a marching army. There was still food on the farms around. People did not yet have to cross the River Yssel to barter their possessions. At the end of the winter, they would be marching hundreds of miles through bitter weather to go to get a few potatoes. So in other words, like, this is not even as bad as it's going to get for people. Like, at this point, some are starving, but at this point, at a certain point, like, it won't just be some, there'll be hundreds and hundreds of people walking, and if not more than that, even trying to find food. Dirk Jan did not know all this, that it would get worse. It was just as well, for what he saw was bad enough. He always was hungry himself, but at home, there was something to eat 3 times a day. What must it be like when miles upon miles of rough roads and dozens of grudging farmers lay between yourself and your next meal? Yet Holland was a rich country. It had been well stocked. It was because the Germans took everything to feed their own people that Dirk Jan's fellow citizens fell by the roadside and their children sat motionless on carts, too weak to move, staring glassily out of hollow eyes. Dirk Jan clenched his fists. He was glad he was going to give the sign that would send arms dropping down, arms to shoot with and fight with and throw off this tyranny of the Germans. The satchel weighed heavily on his shoulders. It also weighed on his conscience. He would have liked to have opened it and divided the food with his exhausted fellow travelers, but reason told him that that would be wrong. He was on a mission. He needed the food to do the mission. And what good would it be among so many? It would be a drop in the bucket. Meanwhile, he'd better keep an eye out for the land watchers, who were always ready to take anything valuable. When he saw any suspicious-looking person coming toward him, he hid in the shrubbery or in a ditch. The satchel was heavy. As he paused to put it down for the 10th time, he saw a pathetic sight. A half-starved little lad, no older than Joris, who had been pushing a handcart on which lay a sack of potatoes, sat by the side of the road trying to stem a nosebleed. It was a very bad nosebleed. It frightened Dirk Jan. Sorry guys, my page flipped on me. One thing about having it on the screen, it frightened Dirk Jan, the nosebleed. The snow around was splattered with blood. No one was paying any attention to the poor fellow. They had no energy to spare for him. People just trudged past, their heads bowed, their eyes fixed on their goal. Dirk Jan made the boy lie on his back and pressed cold snow to the nape of his neck. After a while, the flow ceased, and the boy lay motionless and exhausted against a tree trunk. His eyes were closed, and the lids were a transparent blue. His pale skin, drawn tight over his cheekbones, showed the shape of his skull. His mouth and nose were swollen from bleeding. For a moment, the dark lashes lifted, and the boy gave Dirk Jan a grateful look. "Thank you," he muttered thickly. "Here, have something to drink," urged Dirk Jan. He opened the jar of milk Mother had put in his satchel. The boy drank thirstily and then accepted a slice of Dirk Jan's bread. He ate it slowly, reviving a little. "You shouldn't be sitting in the snow like that," said Dirk Jan worriedly. The boy had on cotton pants. His shoes were too big for him, and the soles were worn through. He had no coat, but he wore several sweaters. Through the holes in each, you could see the ones below. He was a mixture of red, yellow, and black patches, now covered with blood. A blue woolen cap protected his ears. Fortified by the bread, the boy began to talk. "Thank you so much," he said. "I thought I was going to die." He shivered. "You really should get up," said Dirk Jan, trying to help him to his feet, but the boy tottered, too weak to stand. I've gone so far. They wouldn't give me food," he murmured. "I come from the Hague. It's a long walk." From the Hague? Dirk Jan's heart was flooded with pity. Was there no older person who could have gone? He asked indignantly. But the boy shook his head. "Mother is ill," he said, "and father is dead. I don't want my mother to die too." The thought seemed to give him strength, for he managed to reach the cart, but he could not budge it. "You sit on the cart and I will push you," said Dirk Jan. "I'm going to Leiden. I'll bring you to some kind people there where you can rest until you are strong enough to go back to the Hague." "Oh, thank you," sighed the boy. Dirk Jan lifted him into the cart. "What's your name?" he asked. I'm Dirk Jan Verhagen. I'm Evert Hasselaar, said the boy. He seemed drowsy. After a while, he curled up like a kitten and fell asleep, his head on the precious bag of potatoes. Dirk Jan swung his satchel on the cart and felt relief not to have to carry it on his back anymore. But the cart was heavy and progress was slow. Dirk Jan looked at his watch. 1 o'clock. This was terrible. He'd better hurry. Luckily, he could see the blue, misty towers of Leiden rising above the snowfields. But near the city, he met land watchers again. They were holding up people confiscating the food that they bought at such cost. Dirk Jan could not hide this time, not with the cart. One of the land watchers was approaching him. Then Dirk Jan had an inspiration. He pointed to the sleeping Everett in his blood-soaked sweater and said, "There's been an accident. I'm rushing my brother to a doctor." The land watcher stepped back and waved them on. Dirk Jan pulled out his watch again as he entered Leiden. 1:30. It took him some time to find the shop of Hoogerwoord, even though he had seen it on the map. Somehow it all looked different in reality. At the shop, a young assistant told him that Van Manen was out. "I'll ask Mrs. Van Manen if she'll receive you," he said. Mrs. Van Manen came directly, a nice, motherly woman who was very concerned about Everett and lifted him out of the cart. "Poor little fellow," she muttered. "Completely spent, isn't he?" She laid him on a bed and covered him with a rug. Meanwhile, the assistant had put the cart and the potatoes away safely. Dirk Jan felt immediate confidence in Mrs. Van Manen and was soon pouring out the tale of his journey to her, while warming himself at the tiny little stove. Mr. Van Manen came in after a while, and Dirk Jan gave him the message. He had rehearsed it so often the words seemed to be burned in his brain. He had to repeat it several times. Afterwards, Mr. Van Manen stood thinking for a moment. "I'll have to consult some people about this," he said. "I'll be back. Don't wait lunch." He called to his wife. "I don't have time to eat." Dirk Jan remembered his satchel. He went into the kitchen and gave Mrs. Manen the loaf, the milk, the potatoes, the eels, and a chicken. The other chicken he kept for the miller. Mrs. Van Manen had tears in her eyes when she saw the food. "It is a godsend," she said with a catch in her voice. "We haven't tasted decent bread for months. And the eels? We're starving for some fat. A chicken, too? This will make soup which will last us a week. Really, I can't thank your mother enough." "To tell the truth," she said shamefacedly, "I was praying for food this morning." Dirk Jan was pleased to see her so happy. He did not eat much, to leave more for the children, who fell upon the food like hungry sparrows. There were 5 of them, all with straight platinum hair, round violet eyes, pale lips, and pinched cheeks. "How is your uncle?" asked Mrs. Van Manen. "We have been anxious about him. We heard about the raid and we wondered if he had escaped." "Yes, he dressed up as St. Nicholas," said Dirk Jan. Mrs. Van Manen laughed. "Isn't that just like him? He really is brazen. No one else in the underground has his imagination." Dirk Jan felt proud of his uncle, but he began to worry about Mr. Van Manen. It was getting late. He played a bit with the children, kept looking at his watch. It would be dark soon after 4. At last, at 3 o'clock, Mr. Van Manen came back. "It's all right," he said. "You can signal yes." Dirk Jan did not stay for further conversation. He pulled on his coat and ran off. Because remember, he has got to get to the different windmills before it gets dark, because if he doesn't get there, then they won't be able to see the signal. Like, it's one thing to be able to send the signal, but you have to be able to see it too. So that, my dears, was the end of chapter 13. So chapter 14 is called The Falcon, and we will check it out next time and see what happens. So I hope you guys are enjoying it. I certainly am, but I love you guys.